a hand. Welcome once again to another Property Matters podcast. Of course, as many of you will recognize, one of the most regular commentators on this is Wendy Gibson of the First Time Buyers Club. And of course, our Lord and Master Hamish McClay of Search and Convey. Now, we talk about all matters pertaining to properties, particularly the ones which are stirring in the zeitgeist, things that we should know about that are happening right now. And perhaps we'll talk about things that are happening right now and how you can deal with them. This is really an educational show to give you more of a flavor of what is really going on. Because unfortunately, whether you like it or not, modern media tends to only report on the stuff it feels like it needs to report on. So we're going to talk today about all those wonderful things, such as damp, mould, and the power of Awaab's law. So to start us off, as is traditional, Hamish McClay.
Well, it is. When I was thinking, it almost seems damp and cold in my room today. But all I need to do is switch the heating on, which is unlike many people, and sadly, very much to do with social housing, because that seems to be where the error is. And I think, as is often explained by many people, when you have a property of your own, there's every chance that you're actually going to be maintaining that property as you go along, and you want to look after it. If you've got a small number of homes that you're acting as a landlord for, there's a significant chance that you'd actually be looking after those as well. However, when you're a landlord with multiple sites, with multiple properties, is not such an easy thing to do. And it's very hard to actually sort of put one's finger exactly where the worst of these situations are. But sad to say, the feeling that I have about the whole thing and what I've looked at over the last few months or so is that the worst situation happens to be in flats. And the flats aren't properly maintained, and they're largely owned by not private landlords. They tend to be held by sort of councils who are meant to be looking after the properties and are not able to keep up with it. And many residents don't want to say anything initially. And when they say something, it's not necessarily taken very, very seriously. And this, of course, is what brought about Awaab's law. Because there was a young lad, I think he was 2 years old, who actually died as a consequence of the mould that was found in one of the properties, which the owners of actually refused to or not so much refused, but didn't get round to sorting the situation out,
right,
to prevent illness. And of course,
a form of negligence, yes.
Well, yes, I think we might suggest it was negligence.
Right. Welcome to the show, Wendy Gibson. As ever, delightful to see you there in front of your beautifully tiled fireplace. Dare I say it? Beautiful. There we go. Look at the workmanship. Wendy, in all seriousness, why did it take for a young innocent boy to die before anybody takes notice? That's part one. And part two is, why are we in 2025, we're considered to be a first world nation. We're supposed to be leaders of the modern world, and yet we've got people living in stinking, unpleasant, moldy properties. You must come across this all the time.
I do come across it all the time, and it does sadden me that a lot of people are living in such appalling conditions. And I also speak to quite a lot of landlords who own properties, etc. And I also advise first-time buyers who are not necessarily just buying homes for themselves to live in, but also probably homes that they can also rent out. And there seems to be a real clash of opinion between landlords and tenants as to where the source of the problem actually lies. So a lot of landlords will blame occupants of properties. So let's just say when people move into properties, because there are so many different types of buildings, we've got really old properties, really new ones, all of them behave in different ways, and we don't get manuals with our homes when we move into them, do we?
No,
We
absolutely.
figure out as we go along how the heating system works, how the hot water works, all the little nuances around your homes. So obviously, the older the home, the more likely it was to suffer from damp, because there was very little that was done to actually keep the elements out. But because these homes also used to be as leaky as a sieve, there was a lot of ventilation that used to flow through these homes, which kept the damp and the mold at bay. But nowadays, everybody is so focused on, because the government is incentivizing us to, is focusing so much on keeping the heat in, and that also means keeping a lot of the air movement out as well, and that then causes damp and mold. Now, the occupants of a property are very likely not to know that they need to ventilate their bathrooms when they're showering, or if they are cooking in the kitchen, boiling water, they should really be opening up windows in the kitchen to let all the steam out. But equally, because of cost of living crisis, a lot of us are actually, again, encouraged by the government, turning the thermostats down, which means that our homes are ending up being so much cooler than they should be. And that combination between poor ventilation and inadequate heating is causing way more mold issues than what we've ever seen before.
Now, this kind of mold could potentially lead to illness, discomfort, and at the far extreme, loss of life, can it not? I mean,
absolutely. And that's
I keep coming across people who've
Yeah.
got these very, very modern new builds, which are tight as as anything, and don't let any air flow through at all, and they are suffering from mold in the extremities.
Absolutely. And if you
It's
think
an old
about
problem, right?
Yeah, I mean, mold. So there's a difference between black mold and mildew. Mildew is the stuff that you can wipe off the walls with a cloth that's been dipped in bleach, and that should kill it. But black mold actually it buries right deep into the fabric of the whatever it is, whether it's plaster or brick or whatever it might be. So there's a difference between mildew and black mold, but both of them can still cause respiratory issues. If you're thinking about all the spores that you're breathing in, that can provide flu-like symptoms, that can provide probably asthmatic-like symptoms. I'm not a GP, so I'm not quite sure all the specifics that they might be. But in extreme cases, as would happen to this poor little guy, Awaab, of course, it can lead to untimely death.
Hamish, it seems to me that we should be doing better, and yet there's encouragement for the government to make sure that people are all housed, but they're not holding up their end of the bargain by building houses. That we are moving almost resolutely into generation rent, where renting is the default option, and that more and more of these rentable properties, as you say, mostly flats, are owned by either council bodies or housing associations or banks or large organizations, large monoliths, and getting them to change direction or get on with doing what is supposed to be within their remit seems to be harder and harder.
I think it's one of those things, as Wendy mentioned right at the very, very start, there's it's like life generally, I guess. There's a heck of a lot of finger pointing goes on. A lot can actually be said, because it is obvious to those who are aware that basically we do actually need through draft in many, many rooms of the house.
Right.
For example, when you actually look at a bathroom, is very, very often it's a closed room. It's almost kept permanently closed. There's no air sort of coming through, unless, like in our house, quite interesting. It's actually got a nice sort of draft sort of coming through because of the bricks that were originally built into it, because it was built at a sensible time by sensible builders. So that, but it only keeps that internally still. It still needs that draft. It still needs, very, very often we don't like to leave the bathroom door open. So as a consequence of that, if you actually think you've got a bathroom, and inside that you've got a shower cubicle as well, you've got a double whammy. So it's very, very easy for that to actually sort of build up. And sometimes it's not as evident as we might think, where it actually comes and where it actually comes through. However, there are situations, and we've actually seen them recently. And when you actually look at some of these blocks of flats, and they're appalling to look at, where there's absolutely complete, they're meant to be a few years old. And I remember looking at some a couple of months ago, and I could not believe the amount of mold, the amount of ingress, the amount of water that was dripping actually through these various places. And people had to be thrown out because it was so dangerous, because you just don't know what is going to happen. Now, what we've got, and this is a sad aspect about the whole thing, we have decided that, or it has been decided, that the law should be created. Now, this does not help to educate those who are buying a property. Of course, it's something that hopefully we don't learn the hard way, but we can actually sort of learn to look after our properties sort of effectively. But we do have this law coming in. And again, this is putting pressure, because obviously what it does mean, it's another thing for the landlord to look at. And if they're looking at all the costs that's building up, it's going to push them out to a certain... It's not that they don't want to update the buildings or look after them effectively. It's the prohibitive sort of cost of doing it and the threat of legal action. However, it has to be a good thing if people are creating appropriate standards. Now, we did actually find out, as the case with Royal Artillery Quays, that they were set up suggested standards for the buildings there, but they are appallingly sort of under what is really required to do them. Now, within what we're actually trying to do with this, it's really to make sure that those landlords are doing it, and hopefully the councils will get on board. I know myself from the experience of my granddaughter, she had absolutely no challenges at all. They moved into their lovely little bungalow, and basically there was mold, there was damp there, and the social housing people did absolutely nothing about it for her mother at the time. And as a consequence of that, the granddaughter has actually developed, it does seem to be something asthmatic and all the rest of it. Could you actually say that the mold was to blame? Not necessarily, but she didn't have it before the mold. So the chances are it's not something which just sort of happened overnight. There were years of this, and it did take them years to actually do something about getting rid of the damp. So
airborne spores are definitely contributory towards all sorts of respiratory diseases. I know that my dear wife Heather suffers awfully when, for instance, the pollen is dropping, and also if there are lots of airborne spores. Wendy, let me come to you. It seems to me that we are going to be hitting a crisis point, because, as we've talked many times before, the cladding issue is very firmly in the public eye. But when Hamish and I have talked about when they take the cladding off, and you see the quality of the work underneath that just isn't up to snuff, then this seems to be endemic. So once we do that with all of these different flats, and 10,000 odd more residences to which the cladding needs to be removed and replaced, or whatever needs to be done there, reparations, are they going to discover yet more of this stuff? I mean, it just seems to me that we're on a slippery slope, and the only way is down.
It does feel like it, doesn't it? And yeah. I think we've actually lost quite a lot of the skills that we had in the past. Believe it or not, can you remember when you were younger and you'd be woken up in the morning by your mum coming into the bedroom and throwing all the windows open, come whether it was rain or shine, summer or winter.
I remember that keenly. It was freezing, but yes, I remember that. Yeah.
And everybody moaned about it. But the thing is, that was actually really smart, because what it did was it released the house of all the air with condensation in it, the humidity that we'd been breathing throughout the night, and brought drier air into the house, which then was possible for the house to then be heated up way quicker. And a lot of those skills, I think we've actually lost along the way. We've forgotten how to actually operate our homes, believe it or not. So also, you know, Hamish mentioned about air bricks. In the olden days, we used to deliberately build homes that had openings in them other than windows. They were these air bricks, and systematically over time, because surprise, surprise, they bring colder air into the room, people have covered over a lot of those air bricks, which has reduced the amount of ventilation that we have. So a little bit of knowledge about understanding how your home operates can go an awful long way. But be that as it may, the law, and Awaab's law in particular, has taken the responsibility of understanding how homes operate away from the occupants of the home, and is actually now putting that responsibility on the owner of the home, whoever that might be, to make sure that there is proper ventilation and proper heating in place. And there are actually things out there, there are mechanisms out there which can help reduce this problem. One of them is, for example, to put in what's called a PIV system, which basically creates a positive airflow. It's a ventilation system which creates like a positive air pressure inside the home.
Is it like a CPAP machine for your house?
Yes. Exactly. So it pushes all the damp air out and draws in air that can also even be better quality than just outside air, because it can then go through all sorts of HEPA filters and all sorts of things. But again, it comes at a cost. And you know, some places it's possible to put these things in, other places it's not possible.
Well, let me interrupt you quickly, because we've been keenly watched by Zara Olibukas, friend of the show. She still throws the windows wide open every morning, and also she says her lot complain that she's freezing them to death. It probably does them good. Toughen them up, Zara.
But there's theory behind it, because what it does is it's all to do with this thing called relative humidity. And what you're trying to do is get rid of the warm, damp air that's in your home and replace it with the drier, cooler air outside. And because that's the key thing, it's drier, it means that it can actually heat up the home a lot quicker. So everybody moans about it, but you only need to open your windows for like 15 minutes. And then you get a nice, warm, cozy, drier home afterwards.
I never thought we'd see a podcast, Hamish, where we spoke about having to open your windows of a morning. But I guess it's a good idea. Hamish, would you care to take us home, please, sir?
Well, a couple of interesting factors come about. During the period of lockdown, people were just that. They were locked down. And as a consequence of that, they weren't getting as much fresh air. And strangely enough, if you actually speak to the experts, although there is some damaging air outside, and we sort of speak about all this from the vehicles and sort of all the rest of it, it is often healthier to be outside than it is inside. And when you drive around certain places, the continent's an interesting one to go to, but you certainly notice it in certain localities. You'll see windows thrown open and duvets hanging over, getting some airing. And why do you suppose that is? Well, because they're wise. And for that very, very reason that Wendy was actually speaking about, you don't leave them out all day because they get cold and damp and all the rest of it. But you leave them out there so they can breathe fresh air as well as we need that fresh air as well. But it is certainly something that everybody should be aware of and try and keep an eye on. And the fact that it's been brought out, and it will hopefully save the instances of that young lad who had to die for it to be called out. Lots of other people, of course, have been impacted because of that sort of mold and all the rest of it. But it just so happens that was one particular circumstance. But let us hope that it's one of those regulations. We know we don't have enough regulators. We know that some people will just ignore it and let everything will return to what they were doing previously. However, if as many of us become aware of what needs to be done, not only can we do it, we can help other people to do the same thing. So really, it's a pointer in the right direction. It's a shame that somebody had to suffer to actually bring it to everybody else's attention.
Well, there you go. It's amazing that it takes human suffering before anybody bloody takes any notice. I think that's if you look through recent history, it seems to be the way. Somebody has to pass on before anybody takes notice of what really is going on. Once again, let me thank Hamish McClay, who set this thing up in the first place. You're very kind, sir. And Wendy Gibson, friend of the channel of the First Time Buyers Club. And to all of you out there, please do air of a morning. Throw the windows open, let the house get a little bit of movement going in there. Don't just rely on the fact that hopefully it will all sort itself out. Once you've got black mold, it's not a good place to be. And until next time we see each other, please keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and try and look after that mental health. Until next week, goodbye.